Let's start today's lecture. Welcome to Module 4. This week we are discussing cryptography, and the week after, week 5, we will be discussing cryptography again, but with a different perspective. This week we are mainly focusing on confidentiality, and the other aims of security will be discussed during week 5. Cryptography is one of the most important facet of computer security, and this is not a new concept. Cryptography is around for many years. Some people argue that some 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, cryptography was used to be there. But with every year, every era, the process is getting more intense. And whether we are in today's environment, whether we are aware of this fact or not, we are associated with cryptography in one way or the other. We all use online banking, and online banking cannot be undertaken without cryptography. We use WhatsApp. If not all, majority of you must have used at least once WhatsApp tool. WhatsApp uses cryptography when you want to exchange message from one entity to another entity. So cryptography is all around, and it's a very old concept, but it is being improved and refined as we have moved from those years. There are a few important terminologies that you should be aware of when studying cryptography. First terminology is encryption. When we convert a plain text message or a simple message which a human being can understand into something unintelligible form, that is known as encryption. Decryption is the reverse of encryption. When we convert the unintelligible text or message into something that makes sense to us, or that is the actual plain text, that process is known as decryption. Cipher is an algorithm for encrypting or decrypting data. Plain text is the original human readable form that we all understand. Ciphertext is the encrypted, or the plain text is the output of the encrypted plain text data. Key is a very important concept in cryptography. It's a sequence of characters or bits used by an algorithm that helps in encrypting or decrypting the message. Algorithm is a step-by-step recursive computational procedure that helps in performing the encryption and decryption. If you have heard about AES, DES, triple DES, RSA, elliptic curve, these all are the algorithms that are used in cryptography. Cryptography in itself is the study of encrypting or hiding data. Cryptanalysis is the study of breaking the encryption. Those who want to break encryption without having the key or the plain text, those guys are known as cryptanalysts. And cryptology is the overall cryptography and cryptanalysis. When those who study cryptography and cryptanalysis together are known as cryptologists. Another important concept is eavesdropping, which is an unauthorized interception of a message or a communication. And the common example that I can give you is internet, which is all open and is prone to eavesdropping. So people over the internet are looking for all sorts of messages that they can get, and if the message is encrypted, they try to perform cryptanalysis techniques to retrieve that information. To better understand, this is the common scenario where we have got Alice and Bob are the two entities, two names that are often used in cryptography. So Alice, if she wants to send a message to Bob, and the channel in between, which you can see here, is most probably or usually the internet, then if whatever Alice wants to send to Bob, a threat entity, which is Eve here, can always try to get that information over that unencrypted channel, which is the internet. So what if Alice does not want anyone else to read what she wants to communicate with Bob, what is the mechanism that can be implemented? It is the cryptography or the encryption. If Alice can encrypt the original message, which only Bob can decrypt and understand, then this process is known as the encryption process, because that will deny Eve in understanding what Alice has actually communicated with Bob. This is the more formal representation of encryption and decryption process. We have got a plain text, then we perform some encryption, and when I use the word encryption, it means we have implemented some algorithm with the help of a key. When a plain text is encrypted with the help of a key, it becomes a ciphertext, and that ciphertext can be easily communicated over an insecure medium, which is the internet. And then at the receiver's end, which is the Bob apply the decryption algorithm with the same key or a different key. We will understand the concept of key in more detail later. And after performing that decryption process, Bob is able to understand what Alice has actually sent him. Role of cryptography. It is one of the most important fundamental of computer security tools, as I mentioned in the introduction. It is used to hide the information or communication, and what essentially it gives us the confidentiality, which is one of the aim of security. We use encryption, or in general we use cryptography when we want to send highly sensitive documents from one entity to another entity, when we undertake banking, and when we want to store confidential data into our repositories. We implement cryptography. When the data is residing in our databases, nowadays it is recommended that it should be encrypted. So if any entity or to that effect, if any employee of the organization who is not entitled to read that information, if that entity gets access to the organization database, being an employee of that organization, that entity should not be able to read that information, because he is not allowed to read, he is not the legitimate person to read that confidential information. This lecture or cryptography is more focused on ciphers, but we need to understand the concept of codes to better understand what cipher is. Code can be defined as replacing a phrase or message with a word or a symbol. Like in a common day example, we use the word be right back. We don't write be right back. We use the code BRB. Now it has become very common. But what if we use the word attack at midnight? If I want to communicate with my friend that we will be attacking, I will be sending you a message, and that message will tell you the time when we actually have to attack on that particular on that particular entity. So that could be written as AAM. The problem here is that we need to pre-negotiate this code. I need to tell my friend, that what does AAM means in order to be able for both of us to understand what we actually want to do. So for that pre-negotiation, I need to see that person. I need to communicate in one way or the other through message, by meeting him in person, that if I send you a message AAM, it means attack at midnight. If I send you the message BRB, it means be right back. But what if this code gets open to the third person or to Eve? The purpose of encryption will be diminished. There will be no point of having these codes between me and my friend, because Eve is able to understand what these codes mean. So that's why we use the concept of ciphers. And cipher is defined as when we replace individual characters or bits with something that cannot be understood by a person who is not the legitimate entity when I'm communicating with my friend. Like BRB could be replaced with these characters like C, F, and what you are seeing on the slide. So if you compare BRB with these codes, I mean there's a quite difference. BRB can easily be understand. AM can easily be understand by the third person who is not the intended entity. But if I use the concept of ciphers in encrypting B write back, then this message makes no sense to the third entity who is not the intended person to understand this code, because it's not meant for that third entity. In this case, it's Eve. We need to understand the concept of substitution and transposition, because essentially encryption is based on these two types of operation. Substitution is replacing characters with a different character, like security is replaced with a different character. S is replaced with B, E is replaced with Q, C is replaced with A, and you can see the other characters as well. But transposition is each character retains its identity, but the position is changed or the order is changed. In the example on the slide, all the characters or the alphabets that are used in security are still available in the encrypted form, but their position has been changed. So looking at these two examples, substitution cipher is more effective as compared to transposition cipher. Let's discuss some of the ancient ciphers, because I have mentioned that it's been around for thousands of years. Romans typically used substitution ciphers, and one of the common examples that they used was rot 13 or rotation 13. And as per this algorithm or this cipher, they used to move the character towards the right direction 13 steps. So if you add 13 characters into n, the character will become A. If you add 13 characters in O towards the right, the encrypted character will be B. After rot 13, Caesar cipher was another substitution cipher, and unlike the rot 13, the Caesar cipher allowed the entities to move forward or backward depending on the key that is used, that they want to use in encrypting or hiding that plain text. So in Caesar cipher, if Alice wants to send a message to Bob, she can decide that I want to go 7 characters towards my right or 7 characters towards my back. So if you look at this example, the table on the top side are the alphabetical characters starting from 0. The index starts from 0. And if I have to shift the key with 3 characters, then my A will become D, B will become E, and then it will follow this procedure. And if I want to come back, if I want to take out, if my key is -3, then my A will become 0, 25, 24, and 23. So my A will become X then. So this is how Caesar cipher used to work. After Caesar cipher, there was another cipher which was known as Vigenère polyalphabetic substitution cipher. This was an extension of Caesar cipher. In the example, you can see the plain text message is petrol at dawn, and my chosen key is Superman. So we can understand this example by, if you look at the table, you write your plain message, petrol at dawn, and then you write your key underneath each of the character, Superman, and once your key is finished, you again start to repeat your key. Then in Vigenère cipher, we use this table. The first column that you can see is where you find each character. In this example, it is P. And the first row is your chosen key row, where you find the first character of your key, which is S. So where these P and S are combining, that will become your encrypted text. So P and S will give you the result H, A and U will give you the result U, T and P will give you the result I. The problem in this cipher is that the key is repeating once the key is finished. So your key is Superman. If you are trying to encrypt a large text of information, then it becomes very easy for the cryptanalyst to decrypt that data, because once the cryptanalyst will read the encrypted data, there are more chances, because your key is very small, there are more chances that after performing some iterations, the threat entity or the cryptanalyst will be able to retrieve the original message. So these were the issues in the ancient or the historical cipher that actually led us to modern ciphers. So look at this flowchart or this diagram. We have discussed about classical ciphers like Caesar cipher, Rod 13, or Vigenère cipher. Our lecture is mainly focused on modern ciphers because this is what we are using nowadays. Modern cipher is divided into symmetric and asymmetric. And asymmetric cipher is further divided into stream and block, and the same concept is true in asymmetric cipher. In asymmetric cipher, we also use the concept of block cipher and stream cipher. Although I've mentioned this in the notes, which you can see in the slides, I would like to mention here that nowadays we are not using entirely one form of the modern cipher. We are using the combination of the ciphers, and that scheme is known as hybrid scheme, where we use symmetric and asymmetric together. We'll discuss few examples towards the end of today's lecture where we use asymmetric and symmetric cipher together. So here's the scenario. We know about Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob intend to communicate over an unsecure communications channel such as the internet, which is prone to eavesdropping. If Alice and Bob have previously agreed on a secret key and an encryption algorithm, Alice can use this key to encrypt the plain text message and send the cipher text to Bob. The text, which is the cipher text, would have no meaning if malicious user is able to access the transmitted text. This is the graphical representation of what we have discussed in the previous slide. So your sender is Alice. She wants to send a message to Bob, which is your receiver or the recipient. So in order to encrypt that data, Alice and Bob needs to agree on the encryption algorithm, and they need to share their key. Once they are agreed on the key and the encryption algorithm, Alice will use that algorithm and the key to encrypt that data, and then that plain text or the data will become cipher text or the encrypted text. And that encrypted text can be easily communicated over the unsecure medium, which in this case we are focusing on the internet. And when that cipher text is received by Bob, Bob will use the same algorithm and the key, and that will help us, and that will help Bob in decrypting that information. And this way, Alice and Bob will be able to exchange their message with confidence in encryption, using the concept of cryptography or cryptology to that effect. The scenario that I have explained to you is what we use in symmetric encryption, or the way we define symmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is the universal technique for providing confidentiality for transmitted or stored data. It is also referred as conventional encryption, single key encryption, private key, or secret key. It is the only encryption scheme available from the ancient times till 1976, when asymmetric encryption was introduced. So, from the ancient times till 1976, symmetric encryption was the only encryption that people used to have in their the only option people used to have to exchange secure communication. The concept of private key will change once we will come to the concept of asymmetric encryption. So, till the time we do not introduce that concept, you can use the word secret key encryption or private key encryption, but once you the easiest way to differentiate between asymmetric and symmetric is that symmetric encryption is defined or can be termed as the secret key encryption, and the asymmetric encryption can be defined or termed as public key or private key encryption. In symmetric encryption, we use the same key to encrypt and decrypt our data, and it performs simple bit operations, unlike asymmetric encryption, which undertakes complex mathematical operations. Symmetric encryption is well suited for basic computer systems or basic embedded systems, and you can think of symmetric encryption as a password that must be entered, used every time data is encrypted or decrypted. So, you need to have that one key all the time with you if you want to encrypt or decrypt that data. This is what symmetric encryption is all about. And you can see the picture here. It is just like a door lock. You need to have that key all the time to lock or unlock that door. There are 5 ingredients in symmetric encryption. The ingredients are plain text, encryption algorithm, secret key, ciphertext, and decryption algorithm. We know the definition of all these ingredients, so we will not go into the details again. Symmetric encryption is further divided into block ciphers and stream ciphers. In block cipher, we take a plain text and we divide that plain text into fixed lengths. In this example, we are taking 128 bits, but it can be 128 or more or less as well in the case of DES, where we use 64 bits of plain text. It produces a fixed length of ciphertext. Each message is divided into a sequence of blocks and encrypted or decrypted in terms of its blocks. So, if you look at this diagram, you have got a plain text and you divide that plain text into 128 bits of blocks, and then you encrypt each block at a time. If your plain text is not exactly divisible, then the last block is padded with the extra bits to make it a complete set of 128 bits. In symmetric block ciphers, the algorithms that are very common are DES, triple DES, and AES. DES and triple DES are no longer used because of their weaknesses. The only algorithm from this slide that is used nowadays is AES. So, let us discuss what DES or data encryption standard was. It was developed in 1973 and it was adapted as a standard in 1977. It takes the block sizes of 64 bits of plain text, and that 64 bits produces 64 bit of ciphertext. And when we talk about key, the key size here was 64 bits, whereas out of those 64 bits, 56 bits were the effective key length, and the 8 bits were used as the parity bits. Can anyone tell me why we use the parity bits? If you have done computer fundamentals or the basics of computer, what is the function of parity bits? Why can't we use all 64 bits as part of the key? Why we are using only 56 bits and sparing 8 bits for the parity check? So, once that key is received at the recipient end, those parity bits will help the receiver or the receiving end that the key is the same and key hasn't been altered. That is why we use these 8 bits for parity in DES. Because of the weaknesses in DES, cryptanalysts were able to find the vulnerabilities in DES, and brute force attacks were possible. That led to the development of triple DES. Triple DES was introduced in 1985. It was adapted as a measure to resurrect DES, but computationally inefficient. We were repeating the DES 3 times with the aim to make it more secure, so that the cryptanalyst and brute force attacks are not possible on triple DES. But performing 3 cycles of DES when we are on a plain text of data, or the plain block text or the cipher text when we are decrypting the data, was computationally inefficient. So that actually led us to development of AES. AES stands for Advanced Encryption Standard. It is the current gold standard for encryption. It is still not, no one around is still able to break this advanced encryption standard, AES. That's why it is the gold standard for encryption. It was selected by NIST in 2001 through open international competition and public discussion. It uses by default 128 bits of block sizes, which can be configured to 192 or 256 bits. And the key length AES uses is 128, which can also be configured to 192 and 256. The longer key versions are known as AES 192 or AES 256. And the exhaustive key search attack is not currently possible. So even if you use supercomputers, people are trying to break this AES. There's still no success. So that's why we are more focused on using AES, and we are not using DES or triple DES, because after going through some iterations, we are able to break these the 2 earlier algorithms that we have discussed. The second form of symmetric is stream cipher. In stream cipher, we encode the plain text in streams, usually 1 byte at a time. Can be designed to operate on 1 bit at a time or more than 1 byte at a time, but the usual implementation is encrypting or decrypting 1 byte at a time. Key and algorithm is applied to each bit or 1 byte to produce the ciphertext or to decrypt the ciphertext. So we have got a plain text, then we have got key stream, which are the pseudo-random numbers. You don't need to get into the details what pseudo-random numbers are. Just try to understand there is a key stream, which is a set of characters or bits, and you have got a message, and then you perform a XOR operation, and that XOR operation produces the ciphertext. And if you reverse the same cycle, you will be able to find the plain text. Rivest cipher 4 is the example of symmetric stream cipher. It is used in SSL and wireless protocol, the old wireless protocol which is known as web. It is simple and computationally efficient, and the key size used in stream cipher ranges from 40 to 2048 bits. So if we have to compare or draw a comparison between block cipher and the stream cipher, stream ciphers are faster and use far less code than block ciphers. This is the advantage of having stream cipher over block ciphers. Whereas in block cipher, you can reuse the key. In stream cipher, it is not possible to reuse the key, because you have got a stream of keys and you generate those keys at random. So the key cannot be reused in the subsequent messages, whereas in block ciphers, we can reuse our key. Stream cipher is effective in applications involving continuous flow of data and required confidentiality, such as HTTPS, browser or web link. Block cipher is appropriate in applications dealing with block of data, such as file transfer, when we are sending email, or we are handling the database. So in file transfer, email, and databases, we use block ciphers, whereas when we are communicating through the browsers, we use the concept of stream cipher. If you look at the slide, I have not used the word symmetric or asymmetric, because these two concepts and these comparisons are true for asymmetric cipher, asymmetric encryption as well. Talking about symmetric encryption, there are two requirements to be able to securely use this scheme. One is you need to have a strong encryption algorithm. You cannot use DES, you cannot use triple DES, because they have already been compromised. And AES is one of the examples that you should be using when we talk about symmetric encryption. And the second requirement is sender and receiver must have obtained copies of the secret key in a secure fashion and must keep the key secure. So other than the strong encryption algorithm, you need to make sure that the key with which you have secured or encrypted your data is safely transferred or communicated to the receiver. So the exchange of keys should be in such a way that nobody is able to find that key, because if the key is compromised, all your messages are compromised. Even all your previous messages are compromised, because your key is open. So if I ask you, whatever we have discussed till now, what is the problem in symmetric encryption? Why there was a need of having another key encryption scheme in 1976? What was the main issue in symmetric encryption that led us to the development of asymmetric encryption? Sorry? I mean, that cannot be taken as a problem, but what was the actual problem here? I know that is one of the problems, but that is not the actual problem that actually led us to development of asymmetric encryption. It was not public. I mean, you are right, but it was not public. You are on the right track, but I mean, saying that encryption key was public, there was no effective way of sending your key from person A to person B, or there was no secure mechanism available for Alice to send her key to Bob or to the recipient. So this is the problem. How does a sender and recipient share the symmetric key? We can email the key, but do you think will that email be secure? No. We can meet the person in person. Do you think it is practical? If you are living in Perth, you can do this, But if you're living in different states or different countries, you can't meet that person all the time and exchange the key with him or her. Can you trust a courier? No. What if you no longer want an individual to be able to decrypt a message? How would you retrieve that key? How would you revoke that key? What if a key is leaked? So all these problems were the driving factors for the people who work in cryptography to develop the asymmetric encryption. This was one of the problems with the symmetric encryption, that was how to exchange the key. Key exchange was the problem. There is another problem as well. If you look at this diagram, can you find the problem? We know one problem, which is the key exchange problem. What is the second problem in the symmetric encryption? The problem is key management. If you have got so many people involved, how do you manage those keys? If Alice is communicating with all the other three entities, how many keys does Alice has to manage? So, but if your if your entities to which you are communicating are increasing, you need to manage all those number of keys. So, key management was the second problem in symmetric encryption. So, because of these problems, the problems inherent with symmetric key encryption can be solved through asymmetric based encryption. So, what is asymmetric based encryption? It was first proposed by Diffie and Hellman in 1976. It is also known as public key encryption. It was based on complex mathematical functions. It uses two separate keys. One is known as public key and the other is known as private key. So, from here on, being a cybersecurity student, you should not be using the word private key when you have to define your symmetric encryption. Always use to private key is the right concept, but in order to differentiate, you should be using the concept of private key in asymmetric encryption and secret key in symmetric encryption. It ensures confidentiality, key distribution and authentication. We will not discuss about key distribution and authentication in today's lecture. We are only focusing on confidentiality. The other two concepts will come in week 5. So, in asymmetric encryption, as I have mentioned earlier, one key is used for encryption and another for decryption. There are two keys, one is private key and the other is public key. Private key is the recipient's key. It must be kept secret. And security of the system or the security of asymmetric scheme relies or revolves around secrecy of this key, because if private key is lost, then there is no point of having this asymmetric scheme. The other ingredient of asymmetric encryption is public key, which can be given to anyone, which can be attached in emails, even it can be published on the web pages as well. So, if you know the public key and you do not have the private key, you will not be able to deduce private key by looking at the public key. So, if you are not the intended recipient of the message, you will never be able to decrypt the encrypted message. This is what the essential idea behind asymmetric encryption is. Public key is made public for others to use by the owner to encrypt the messages. Private key is only for its owner to decrypt the message, and the recipient has to keep the key in their possession at all times. This is the responsibility of the recipient to secure their private key. As in case of symmetric encryption, where we had 5 ingredients, in asymmetric encryption we have 6 ingredients: plain text, encryption algorithm, public key, private key, ciphertext, and the decryption algorithm. We know the definitions of all these terms, and because we have discussed in the first or the second slide of today's module. And I have mentioned, to avoid the confusion, the term secret key is used with symmetric encryption, and public and private key are used with asymmetric encryption. So, what are the essential steps, or what is the scenario in asymmetric encryption? Each user generates a pair of keys, which is public and private key, to be used for encryption and decryption of messages. Each user places its public key in a public register or any other accessible file. If Bob wishes to send a private message to Alice, Bob encrypts the message using Alice's public key. So, if Alice and Bob wants to communicate, in this example, if Alice and Bob wants to communicate, and if Bob wants to send a message to Alice, Alice needs to send her public key to Bob. Bob will encrypt the message using Alice's public key and will send that encrypted or ciphertext message to Alice. Since Alice has already sent her public key to Bob, and Bob has encrypted the plain text using Alice's public key, Alice, once she receives the message from Bob, which is the ciphertext, she will use the private key of that public key to decrypt that message. Like I've mentioned in the last bullet, when Alice receives the message, she decrypts it using her private key. No other recipient can decrypt the message because only Alice knows her private key. Is it clear? So can you easily differentiate between symmetric and asymmetric encryption now? In symmetric we had only one key. In asymmetric we have got two keys. One key is used to encrypt the message, the other key is used to decrypt the message. The sender has to send her or his public key to the receiver, and that receiver will use that public key to encrypt that message in order to communicate or send the encrypted text to the sender of the public key. If there is any confusion, please ask at this stage, because things will get more complex in the subsequent slides and next week. And what is, I mean, you're saying that you use in PGP that uses the concept of secret key?
Yeah, when you list the keys, it is when you private key, but when you actually list the keys, it's a set key, it's only a set key.
I mean, this is just the implementation of asymmetric and symmetric algorithm. I mean, you can still use the word secret key to be replaced with private key in this concept, but in order to be able to clarify your minds, you should always be focusing on the word secret key when we talk about symmetric encryption, and the word private key when we are talking about asymmetric encryption. It is for this reason I used both words when I was discussing symmetric, because this is what, if you start reading all different articles on the web, you will find that people often use these terms interchangeably. It actually confuses the reader. And I have negated myself purposefully here just to avoid the confusion in your minds that secret key should always be referred to symmetric encryption and private key should always be referred to asymmetric encryption. If you talk about applications of asymmetric encryption can be classified into three categories. They are used in digital signatures, they are used in symmetric key distributions, they are used in encryption of secret keys. Not all algorithms in asymmetric encryption can be used for the above categories. We will introduce the concept of digital signatures next week and symmetric key distribution as well. We are only focusing on encryption of secret keys and to somewhat symmetric key distribution, but we are not focusing on digital signatures this week. These are the few examples of asymmetric encryption algorithms. The first is RSA, which was introduced in 1977. It was introduced by Ron Rivest, Eddie Shamir, and Len Edelman. That's why we use the word RSA, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. And it was following the concept of block cipher. It was converting the plain text into blocks of plain text, and then each of the block of plain text was being encrypted into ciphertexts, the equivalent block of ciphertext. Then is Diffie-Hellman. It was introduced in 1976 by Diffie and Hellman. It was used for key exchange, secret key, or for other symmetric encryption as well. We have got DSS, which stands for Digital Signature Standard. It was introduced in 1991, revised in 1993, and recently it was revised in 2013. And DSS is only used in digital signatures, not any of the other categories that we have discussed in the earlier slide. And then the other example of asymmetric encryption is elliptic curves. Elliptic curves have started to challenge RSA. People are still evaluating elliptic curve, but it has started to challenge the RSA, and the confidence level is still being established when compared to RSA, but the only thing that gives advantage to elliptic curve over RSA is it is computationally efficient if you compare it with RSA. This is the table I have taken from your textbook by William Stellings. These are the four algorithms: RSA, Diffie-Hellman, DSS, elliptic curve, and these are the three categories: digital signature, symmetric key distribution, and encryption of secret keys. And you can easily see that RSA can be implemented in all these three categories, whereas the other three are applicable on either one category or the two categories, but not in all categories. Sorry, elliptic curve can be implemented in the like RSA in all the categories, but Diffie-Hellman and DSS are not designed to be implemented in all the categories that we have discussed. So how do we attack the crypto? What are the concepts that are applicable in attacking the cryptography? One is the ciphertext only attack, or COA. In ciphertext only attack, the cryptanalyst has access to the ciphertext or the encrypted text, which have been encrypted using the same key. And the goal of the cryptanalyst in this category is to determine the plain text. So your cryptanalyst has got the ciphertext, and the condition is that they have been encrypted with the same key. And the cryptanalyst attempts to find out what was the plain text against this ciphertext. This type of cryptanalyst attack is known as cipher-only attack. Like we discussed this ciphertext when I introduced you to the concept of ciphers. So this was the encryption of B write back. So the cryptanalyst will have access to this ciphertext, and from using this ciphertext with the condition that it has been encrypted using the same key, the cryptanalyst will attempt to find the plain text. The other type of attack is known plain text attack. In the known plain text attack, the cryptanalyst has access to one or more original plain text messages and the resultant ciphertext. So your cryptanalyst has got plain text and has got the ciphertext, but your cryptanalyst is attempting to find the key that is used to decrypt that message. The third type of, or the third category of attacking crypto is chosen plain text attack. In this category, the cryptanalyst has access to the crypto system used. So cryptanalyst knows what the algorithm is, introduces plain text and monitors the ciphertext, and the goal is to determine the key and the cipher. The last category of attacking the crypto, these are just the broad categories, is chosen ciphertext attack. It is the reverse of what we have studied in the last slide. The cryptanalyst has access to the crypto system used. It introduces ciphertext and monitors the plain text, and the goal is to determine the key and cipher. So I have used the term cryptanalyst and cryptanalysis. I have introduced you with the definition of the word cryptanalyst, but how can we differentiate between cryptanalysis and brute force attacks? In attacking encryption, there are two general approaches that we use. One is known as cryptanalysis, and the other is known as brute force attacks. Cryptanalysis is attempts to deduce a specific plain text or deduce the key. If the key is compromised, all your previous messages are decrypted, or the attacker or the threat entity will be able to decrypt all the previous messages that have been decrypted using that key that has been deduced by the cryptanalyst. Whereas in brute force attack, we try every possible combination, every possible key on a piece of ciphertext that enabled us to bring back that plain text. So brute forcing is trying or attempting all the possible keys on that ciphertext to be able to find the key, to be able to find the plain text or the original message. I will discuss more about brute force attacks, because discussing cryptanalysis is beyond the scope of this unit. It involves more of the mathematics and technical details. We are just getting ourselves introduced with the concept of cryptography. Brute forcing attack is a very common and easy to understand attack. We systematically test every key until the correct key is found. A brute force attack has a 100% chance of being successful given enough time. Asymmetric key is more is there any question on this brute forcing attacks? Sorry? Yes, it depends on the computer power, but if we talk about AES, NIST has challenged that it will take 149 years to break that cipher. So if someone is able to break that cipher after 149 years, do you think that message will have any effectiveness? Because the purpose behind exchanging that message will already been fulfilled. So if someone come to know after 149 years that this was the message that was encrypted 149 years ago, what will have the effect of putting so much resources behind decrypting that message? It does depend on the system that you are using, but the problem is that given the time that is involved in brute forcing attacks, there is no point in using resources for such kind of attack. Even if you have got supercomputers, NIST has challenged that it is. 149 years can be reduced. Nobody is challenging this 149 years figure, but still it will take an sufficient amount of time, and by the time that you will be able to decrypt that message, there will be no point of having that message with you. So nobody is going to put that much of resources or efforts to decrypt that message. There are some common misconceptions when we talk about asymmetric and symmetric encryption. One of the misconceptions is asymmetric key is more secure than symmetric encryption from cryptanalysis, which is not correct. Security of any encryption scheme depends on the length of the key and the computational work involved in breaking a cipher. So if someone says that asymmetric encryption is more secure than symmetric encryption, this is a common misconception. This is not true. If the implementation of an asymmetric algorithm or asymmetric scheme is not efficient, then it can easily be break. You cannot rely on asymmetric scheme if the implementation is not good. So this common misconception or this common argument is not correct. Both are secure depending on the application or the way you have implemented that asymmetric or symmetric algorithm. The other misconception is asymmetric encryption has made symmetric encryption obsolete. This is not correct. In fact, the former is computationally intensive. Asymmetric takes more time in processing as compared to symmetric encryption. So you cannot rely on asymmetric encryption because it takes more time in calculating those, in performing those mathematical calculations or complex mathematical functions. So this is a common misconception. The other common misconception is key distribution is trivial in public key or the asymmetric encryption. It is not correct. It requires a protocol. It has to have a central agent. It has to have some procedures. Using those procedures and protocols, you can exchange your public key. So this concept is not correct. It's not exchanging a public key is not that easy. Generating the public key even is not that easy. You need to have a central agent that manages your public key. Those who want to read more about this, it is beyond the scope of this unit, but if you have ever heard about the word public key infrastructure or PKI, this is the second bullet is what we are talking about, public key infrastructure. This is beyond the scope of this unit, but if you want to read more about this bullet, why key distribution, why this is a common misconception, you need to understand the concept of public key infrastructure, where we talk about the central agents. And those central agents basically pushes the key to all the other entities that are involved in that cycle. So let's discuss something in general about encryption. We have discussed about symmetric encryption. We have discussed about asymmetric encryption. We know what is a block cipher. We know what is a stream cipher. We know why we entered into modern ciphers. Why we haven't relied on the ancient or the historical ciphers. What were the problems there? What actually has led us to symmetric and asymmetric, and what are the pros and cons in using symmetric and asymmetric ciphers. So we know the technical aspects, the basics of technical aspects. So let's discuss in general about poor uses of encryption. The way in which a crypto system is used could be a weakness. Even if you are using a strong encryption algorithm, if the implementation or the way you are using that encryption algorithm is not secure, you are prone to attacks. You have got a vulnerability in your system. The two examples I have given here is that you encrypt your confidential documents, but leave plain text copies on your hard drive. What is the point of encrypting that data? If you have encrypted your document, you've got a purpose behind encrypting that document. So if I take you back to the example of attack trees in module 2, where I ask you to obtain the login credentials of your friend, if you are able to find the login credentials of your friend, and if you've got access to your friend's computer, if your friend has deleted all the plain text documents, then your friend can say or can argue that, look, my documents were secure. No one is able to get access to my documents because I have saved my encrypted documents on my computer. So I have maintained the confidentiality of my documents. But what if your friend is maintaining the encrypted document as well as the same version of the document in plain text? The implementation is poor. The use of encryption algorithm is very poor, and there is no point of using that encryption algorithm because you are not using the concept of security in its entirety. You have implemented the same password key for all your accounts. What is the point of, if one key is gone, if one password is gone, all your accounts have gone. If you are using the same password for Blackboard and the same password and that very same password is used for your online banking, if your Blackboard password is gone, your online banking is gone. So you need to analyze when you are setting the passwords or the passphrase on your accounts, that what is the importance of this account to you. The Blackboard account is not that important for you as compared to your online bank account. So you need to differentiate between the different concepts, different areas where you are implementing your passwords or using your keys. How can we place trust in encryption? According to Kirchhoff's principle, every encryption algorithm should be made public. The academia, the people who work in the academia support this notion that yes, all encryption algorithms should be made public. The reason behind supporting this notion is because the academia believes that when the encryption algorithm is public, people will be able to find the weaknesses in those encryption algorithms, and then we can either revoke that encryption algorithm, or we can try to fix those weaknesses in that encryption algorithm. Whereas the security agencies or the government agencies do not agree to this Kirchhoff's principle. They argue that it is not necessary to tell or to let people know that which encryption algorithm is being used, because they want to hide those weaknesses, because they might have installed those weaknesses just to create backdoors or to get the decryption keys. So whenever we have to find we have to find some encryption algorithm, we need to ask these questions. Can encryption software be trusted? If you are using some uncommon encryption algorithm, can you trust that encryption algorithm? You cannot, because you are not aware of the vulnerabilities or the weaknesses that are associated with that algorithm. And I have discussed why governments and other agencies are not allowing or not supporting this notion of making the encryption algorithms public, because they might use these encryption algorithms to create backdoors or to find the decryption keys, out of those encryption algorithms. And one last question is it's a very open-ended question. There is no direct answer. Which is more trustworthy, commercial encryption algorithms or open source encryption algorithm? There is no single answer to this question. We can have a longer and longer discussion on this topic, but there is no direct answer to this to this notion that which one is more trustworthy, commercial or the open source software. It depends on the factor that how much people have worked on this particular algorithm, how much people know about this algorithm, and how much time crypt analysts have given to this commercial or open source softwares or the encryption softwares. If it's a commercial software and people do not have any access to, or the crypt analysts do not have access to this commercial tool, how can you trust that software or that encryption algorithm or that encryption utility? This is a very open-ended question. There is no direct answer to this. But when you are using any uncommon encryption algorithm, you need to evaluate all these issues that I have discussed with you before starting to implement this in your daily life. And the last slide is the social issues that are related with the encryption. It can be used for criminal purposes by the nefarious people. It has been used in illegal activities like drug arms deals and the other terrorist activities. Encryption is used in illegal digital materials such as child pornography. Encryption is a threat to intellectual property, and encryption is used in extortion. So while there are many positive uses of encryption, there are some negative uses of having encryption or the concept of cryptography, because this is being used by the terrorist organization. And a lot of people in the academia are now doing research on understanding the ciphertexts that are being exchanged by the terrorist organizations, to understand what messages they are exchanging. So they might be using some algorithm which is not common, but which might be more secure than AES, or they might be using AES and the key is that strong that they are unable to, the government agencies or the security agencies are unable to decrypt that message. So this is a challenge for the government agencies and the and the secret agencies to decrypt the messages that are being used by the terrorist organizations or that is being used under the illegal activities or child pornography to that effect. So, this brings us to the end of today's lecture. This was a short lecture. I have modified this lecture a lot because I have deleted all the technical details out of this material. The reason behind is that it is an introductory level unit, and I do not expect you to understand the basics or the advanced level of mathematics. Those who are in the cyber security and or the computer science, they will have a unit with the title cryptography, where you will have to go through all the mathematical details of cryptography. This is your tutorial activity for this week. Let me capture the main screen. There are some questions which you should be able to answer. These questions can come in the exams as well, or I may reword these questions, but if you are able to answer these 5 questions, you should feel safe in that you have understood this lecture, this module. So, these 5 questions you should be able to answer at this very moment without referring back to the slides, because I have focused on all of these questions in this slide. There are some objectives: true and false, fill in the blanks, multiple choice questions. Then there is some fun stuff for you. I have using rod 13, I have placed a ciphertext here. Your job is to find the original text. Using Caesar cipher, I have given you 2 ciphertexts, and I have given you the keys as well. One is +15 shift, the second is encoded with -7 shift. Try to find the plain text behind these messages. You can find online tools. You can paste these ciphertext on those tools, and you will be able to find those plain text, but that is not the purpose of giving you this activity. I want you to understand the concept of cryptography by implementing these basic or historical encryption algorithms. I have given you the key. Once you are able to answer these 3 plain text, you should be able to answer these questions: that what are the ciphertext in above 3 cases, what are the plain texts, what encryption scheme have been used, and what are the keys used in each of the activity. If you are able to answer these questions, your concepts of the basic terminologies are clear. This is what you need to know in cryptography in this unit. I would again advise you not to use the online tools, because it will defy the purpose of giving you this tutorial activity. Then there is some more fun stuff. It is going to take a lot of time, but this is what I wanted you to play around with TrueCrypt. You will not be able to perform this activity on the uni computers. You need to have this. You need to perform this activity on your personal computers, laptops, or desktop computers. And then towards the end, yes. And then towards the end, the password that you will set to encrypt your container, please use a simple password. This is just a learning activity. Do not use the complex password. You will be required to open your Kali Linux machine and perform a brute force attack. It is not a brute force attack, it is a dictionary attack that I want you to perform. And then by performing this attack, you will be able to find the key that you have, or the password that you have used for your TrueCrypt container. This will give you more hands-on practice on how to use Linux, how to use Kali Linux. And if you are unable to find the answers of the objectives, MCQs, fill in the blanks, please do post a message on discussion board. I will give you the answers, but they are very simple questions. I want you to answer those questions as they are very simple, and you should be able to answer them in less than a minute, I would say. Yes. No. I have mentioned very clearly in my earlier modules that Kali Linux is not part of your exam. I am just putting this extra effort for you people because in the next semesters or the next units when things will become more technical, nobody is going to teach you the basics of Kali Linux or the Linux in general. This is the extra effort I'm putting in for you guys. If you are not comfortable, if you do not want to perform this activity, please don't do it. I mean, it is not going to be examined in the exams. It is in your benefit. It is not in my benefit. Like if, let me close this lecture because we have finished.